All right, so in our last videos, we talked about the changing populations and how different populations change and the differences between developed and developing nations and their population growth. So now we're going to talk about why is this a problem? Why is population growth or rapid population growth an issue in different nations? So some of the basic problems with population growth is where this population growth is happening, the infrastructure surrounding this population growth, the population growth, and the havoc it provides on the environment. So population that has high rate of growth are going to create environmental problems in general. Rapidly growing populations use more resources, and oftentimes this growing populations are in countries that lack resources for their current population. So this can be a big problem on these nations in these countries. Also, infrastructure. So if you have an infrastructure for a basic population and you have a rapid increase, then that infrastructure is definitely not set up for that increase of population. So this infrastructure could be roads, bridges, sewers. You may have waste going into regions where communities get their clean water. That's a big problem. Subways, schools are overcrowded, hospitals are overcrowded. All of these are problems with increased population. So this is what we just kind of talked about. Problems with rapid growth. We use our resources faster than the environment can renew them. So that's an environmental factor associated with that. And that could look like maybe clearing out rainforest areas for croplands. We know from previous units that that's not very viable soil for cropland. So once we clear that out and use it for a couple of years, then it's no longer a good soil for agriculture, and so or crops, and so we're going to have to clear out even more of that rainforest. So those are definitely environmental problems with the rapid growth. Standard of living is going to decline when wood is removed from local forests faster than it can grow back. And then also when waste is going to overwhelm the local water resource. Again, the developing nations have a higher growth rate, and these are regions that don't have a lot of resources and don't have great infrastructure as it is. So when we're talking about clean water, that's a big issue as well. So different symptoms of populations growth is going to be suburban sprawl. This is when people are spreading out around cities and creating this large suburban area. Polluted rivers, if our waste is going to where our clean water source is at, even if it's not, even if it's just polluting rivers around a community and not affecting our drinking water. Barren lands, we only have so much land that is usable for crops, and so if we're using those lands for crops as well as living on those lands or around those lands, that's a problem. Inadequate housing and overcrowding of schools. These are all problems with rapid population growth. And as we saw when we were doing our water projects, unsafe water is a big problem, especially in developing nations, sometimes in developed nations as well, but especially in developing nations. So if we have a rapid population growth and we don't have a good sewage system, then where's that waste going? Well, it's going to our river, and then our community is getting their quote unquote fresh water from that river, and it's just unsafe conditions. So lots of people are dying from this unsafe water source, particularly children. So once our sewage runs into these rivers, then it becomes a breeding ground for organisms. They cause disease and cause deaths by the millions. what's the impact on land? So there's only so much arable land, as we talked about before. And so arable land is farmland that can be used to grow crops. And so the growing population, they're going to populate around these areas that have this arable land. So we also have infrastructures happening, roads being built, houses being built on this arable land, which is already a small amount of the land in a community in the first place. So we also have a problem with urbanization. So it used to be that most people lived in rural areas, and it's becoming more and more common to live in urban areas. So more and more people are moving to urban areas. And so urbanization is the increase of a density of people in these urban areas. So as we know, not all of the nations go through these steps or progress through these stages at the same time. We have developing nations, we have very developing nations, then we have very developed nations who have a lot of wealth, a lot of resources. So it's a very skewed demographic around the world. And so the least developed countries are countries that have been identified by the United Nations as showing the fewest signs of development. This is in terms of our resources, it's in terms of their economy, in terms of their infrastructure. All of these things classify a developing nation. These countries may be given priority for foreign aid and development programs to address their population and environmental problems. So what are some of these priorities that foreign aid is going to address? And so we're going to address that in this next slide. Well, first let's talk about the diversity of these demographics. So we have here a map, and if we look at the past like 60, 70 years, we can see that our population, we have European population and North American population, these populations have not increased that dramatically. The populations that are increasing really dramatically are these developed nations. So we have Asia here, and we have Africa, and then Latin America countries, and you can see the increase is much greater in these developing countries. And so this is how the demographics of population growth are kind of skewed to these developing countries and putting a huge strain on these countries that already have a strain economically on infrastructure and their lands. So how are we going to manage this? How do we help manage this population growth? Because it's definitely a global problem, and everybody has a hand in how we help this population growth. So today, less developed countries face the likelihood that continued population growth will prevent them from imitating the development of the world's economic leaders. So as their population grows and ours doesn't, it makes it a wider and wider gap that they can't necessarily fill. Countries such as China, Thailand, and India have created campaigns to reduce the fertility rates of their citizens. Some of these things might be laws making it only legal to have a certain amount of children. Some of them may be financial incentives from the government that give incentive for people to only have so many children. Some of these include family planning programs in order to help families regulate the amount of children that they have. In 1994, the United Nations held the International Conference on Population and Development, and we'll talk about their goals that they have set and continue to set. It involved debates about the relationships between population, development, and the environment. And many countries favor stabilizing population growth through investments in development, especially through improvements in women's status. So what does that mean? So instead of making laws against having more children, this hasn't really been proven to help their situations economically. But what has been shown to help is to provide aid, to educate women, for financial planning. All of those things have been proven to help. So what are some of their goals? So some of their goals are to provide universal access to a full range of safe and reliable family planning methods and related reproductive health and services, reduce infant mortality rates to below 35 infant deaths per 1,000 live births. This kind of goes with increasing health care. It also goes with increasing clean water and sanitation. Close the gap in maternal mortality between developing and developed countries. Achieve a maternal mortality rate between 60 deaths per 100,000 live births. So if we talk about the health of a nation, the main thing that gets brought up first is always infant mortality. So by decreasing infant mortality, we're increasing the health of a nation as a whole. Increase life expectancy at birth to more than 75 years. Remember when we talked about the gaps in living expectancy, when we talked about this, we talked about the infant mortality rate bringing these life expectancies down in certain countries. So infant mortality rate goes hand in hand in all of the health issues within a nation. Achieve universal access to the completion of primary education. Ensure the widest and earliest possible access by girls and women to secondary and higher levels of education. So that is the main goal here. We want to provide education for women and girls. That has been shown the most promise to decreasing population growth, as we've talked about before. So with these goals that we talked about, we want this to be what our population growth would look like as we continue on. So with these goals, worldwide fertility rates are dropping. And these are the projected drops. I don't know what the actual drop is at this point. When they create another census, hopefully that will be the actual drop in population. So growth is slowing at this point. So fertility rates have declined in both developed and less developed regions. Demographers predict that this trend will continue and that worldwide population growth will be slower than this century than the last century. And if current trends continue, most countries will have replacement level fertility rates by 2050. If so, world population growth would eventually stop. So we believe that our carrying capacity as humans, will be caused by more social issues and economic issues rather than basic natural issues that would cause a carrying capacity in any other animal kingdom. Okay, so that is our completion of human population. So go ahead and make sure that you look over the videos, take notes on what you can, and then we will go ahead and take the quiz online. And I'll see you guys in class.